Hello and welcome to Malwise. Today we're going to be discussing the first video in the Malwise Diaries series, which is a physical pen test and internal-external pen test engagement we did for a client. So within the sort of video, we're going to talk you through what we did on the assessment, how we got in, thoughts throughout the pen test, the sort of information that we acquired throughout the assessment and how that was relevant to the client and to us as testers, the sort of the debrief that we gave the client, and then the outcome. So how this assessment drove the business to change and the sort of tangible benefits that they actually got from having a pen test, which I think sometimes you don't always truly understand until you have that, and then either you're proven wrong or you're proven right that your security posture is good, or you're proven wrong and it's actually terrible and you've been running off arrogance is probably one of the better words. When we do a lot of the engagements, we get a lot of the IT teams, you won't get in, you won't do this, you won't do that, we're really well set up, and then we sort of skirt through their networks like gleeful children, and then you can sort of see their faces at the end where they know they've been arrogant and they hadn't set it up properly, or there'd been misconfigurations, but no one's perfect. I think how I approach an assessment where it's to aid IT teams to improve their security or improve their setup, or also improve their competence as a professional, so they won't do that again, and actually the more assessments they'll have, the more their knowledge is improved. So let's get straight into what we did on this assessment. And it always makes me laugh because this client in particular was very confident about their posture. They had supposedly done everything. They're a third-party SOC. The alerting was set up, and they were a cyber-conscious business. So the first thing that we sort of, me and a colleague did before we'd kicked off the assessment was we had a little bit look on the dark web. And there was about 150 password breaches for this client. So we started simultaneously going down the list. And I thought, we'll log into their 365 because that was in scope. So we were trying the usernames and passwords that we found, and about 20 of them, there's a little bit more, but I can't remember the exact number, there was around 20, we logged straight into their 365 accounts, no MFA. And I went, oh, this is interesting for a company that has everything set up. So it sort of set the tone that it was more, maybe a bit of bravado from the IT team in front of the execs when we were having the scoping meeting. So that already gave us a little bit of a pick-me-up before we start the assessment. We started looking at Google Maps. We started having a look at the business on their LinkedIn, their socials, seeing what they were doing. So trying to build up a picture of things that we could use and say and have a little bit of knowledge before we turned up on site. So we drove down, me and a colleague, and we started scoping out. We parked up, and we noticed there was a reception with two ladies. We thought it's probably not best to walk through there and ruin our chances. Then we started walking around the building, looking at other exits. We tried a few of the doors, but then after about 30 minutes, we noticed a lot of the smokers came out the fire exit. So we pretended to smoke, wait for someone to come out, and then we just sort of, they held the door open. We walked in, boom, into the building. So I left my colleague outside. He was chatting to other members of staff, just trying to elicit some more information out of them, sort of build up a repertoire. So they had seen him in the building, they'd seen him outside, they've had a conversation. It's building that pretext. So I started walking around the building. I walked around various offices, from HR to finance to some of their operational teams, unchallenged, unfazed. It was great. I was like, this is turning out to be a great assessment, actually. It still to this day makes me chuckle. One of the things I noticed was on the bottom floor is their network cabinet was just in one of the corridors. That's an odd place to put a network cabinet, but nonetheless, I had a few keys on me. I tried them, none of them worked, and I thought, bugger. But I noted the key number from the lock on the front. They have a 4-digit key. Went onto a network cabinet supplier's website, ordered that. I then went down and sat in one of the offices and sort of plugged into the network. from the network as a non-authenticated user. I was just doing some generic scans, seeing what I could find, sort of mapping out the network. Tried some of the passwords that we'd successfully logged into 365, and again they were linked to their domain passwords, so we could log into some of the shares authenticated. But at this point I was just trying to see what I could get. It was anything that was really obvious, and there was a few things, but at this point in time I wasn't interested in moving on there. I was just trying to get in, see if we could get some low-lying fruit. I went into one of the other offices. I had noticed that their Wi-Fi password was written on a post-it note, so now I had access to sit outside if I chose and scan the network and do whatever I wanted. So as a standard user, I'd gotten quite a lot of information from network shares to things that shouldn't have been in some of them shares, people's passwords for other applications. I noticed a lot of them were using generic accounts. They were clearly all logging in as one administrator to the HR system. And some of the information that I pulled out was terrifying, was full financial records, banking details from which we obviously didn't log into the banks because that was out of scope. But I left that day and I came back the next day with the keys. So I opened the network cabinet, plugged in, and the first sort of thing I did is I scanned the domain controller to return some of the information about the Active Directory. And one of the things I was noticing as I was going through the XML format was they were putting, a lot of them were putting passwords in, so that the IT team this is, for accounts. And I got about a quarter down and there was a domain administrator account with the password in. I thought, no, that can't be that silly. But then I RDP'd to the domain controller with that account and I logged in. I thought, no, they clearly are a little bit silly. I then created my own domain administrator account, and then from there started scanning everything, full access to shares of the domain administrator, and there was so much information that we pulled back from financing, HR. Again, there was a real current theme in people's roaming profiles that they had Excel documents or text documents with username, passwords, and other information from there. We noticed as we were looking at their HR system that it was developed quite some time ago and clearly hadn't been maintained, but the database was unencrypted, so we downloaded it, hooked it up on our end, and we could look at the username and passwords for that, unencrypted. So then we started logging into the HR system because that was in scope and looking at some of the things that we could have returned. So all in all, from like this is day 2 of the assessment, and we had access to the 365 domain controller, all the network shares, the HR system. We even got the administrative logons from one of these network shares for the phone system, so we could now intercept phone calls. We got their sort of communications email as well, so if we'd been malicious individuals, we could have sent out something nefarious over the communication to their client base, and then we could have intercepted calls on their VoIP system as them and said, yeah, that's genuine, please fill out your banking details, or whatever it may be. We could have been quite creative with what we did on this assessment, but the real theme was there was no network segregation, there was no sort of emphasis put around on using secure passwords. MFA was just not a thing. I couldn't understand why there was MFA nowhere. Everything was on the same network, from printers to Internet of Things to CCTV to door intruder alarms, PIN systems. It was it's the one thing that just makes me laugh every time I think about it. It's like this is like a child has been given the task of setting up a network, and it worked, and they thought no one's getting past the firewall, so it doesn't really matter what we do internally. Again, that proved incorrect, because if they had been targeted and someone had tried their VPN service from the outside, which the records were published, so that's all public information, logged in with one of the breach credentials, they'd have been on the network. So one of the things my colleague did was, when I was inside, he was VPNing in and as a standard user that we breached, and then elevating his privileges from a standard user to a domain administrator by capturing one of the administrator's hashes when he was on the network. There was a few group policies that allowed us to elevate our privilege as well. We could insert ourselves into them groups and elevate from there, which was quite interesting. There was so many attacks that we did internally. Like one of the attacks that I thought I'd never, this is the only place I've ever seen it, was the Eternal Blue vulnerability, because they had the prerequisite domain controller, and I thought, nice, it's going to work, and it worked. And I thought that was quite useful information. When you do some of these cyber courses, you get taught some of these legacy attacks, and you're like, I'm never going to see these out in the wild. And then you do see them out in the wild, and it's like, it blows your mind that someone's still using legacy sort of equipment out there without a sort of care in the world. Even though they had quite a significantly expensive firewall, that was the only thing they invested in. So ultimately, throughout the assessment, we fully breached the domain. We breached the domain in multiple ways due to misconfigurations, to vulnerabilities in some of the outdated software that they had. Really a lack of awareness of staff and their IT for doing things, but also a lack of awareness from the board or the leadership of that company. 5 days of being obnoxiously loud and sort of overly confident. There's not one alert from the SOC, and we were sometimes absolutely hammering some of the things internally just to see if we would get an alert. We'd get a call from the IT manager to say, "Hi, I've caught you," and that didn't happen. So we sort of had the wash down with the client, and the IT team came in utterly confident, and that confidence was shattered within a couple of minutes when we started giving the presentation and the debrief of what we'd actually achieved. If we'd been malicious, or we'd been a sort of third-party hacking group, we would have absolutely crushed them, from their finances to their servers to everything. We'd probably just ransomware them and then stole all the information that was in plain text about them and their clients. So it wouldn't have been a particularly good outcome. So we started giving them, and then there was a lot of the board members were sort of, their ears were pricking up as they were starting to understand the sort of severity of their state of play. So what the assessment drove was a sort of a shock tactic in, you're really not as good as you think you are. And if you are being fed information from your IT team that you secure and you kept up to date, that's not effective. Whether that's a lack of knowledge or they genuinely think they are, that's beside the points. So what they got out of it was their board was blissfully aware that they were in a bad place. IT internally was given significantly more investment in terms of money, but also that enabled them to take on 2 new members of staff. It allowed them to put in a plan to get the legacy sort of equipment upgraded to modern hardware, application, software. It got them a conversation with their SOC team to find out why not a single alert had been brought up that day or throughout the week. So allowed them to sit down with them and go, what are you doing? What are you monitoring? And allowed them to sort of start to fine tune that internal monitoring. It really started to show them that they had no real policies inside, apart from a 30-page joint book that talked about HR and IT and everything all combined. But it allowed them to put in a sort of soft ISMS, so not a full 27001 sort of accreditation, but they started putting in policies and they started enforcing passwords at a higher level, saying that it would have to be minimum of 12, and they started following the National Cybersecurity 3-word rule. It led to them engaging in actual employee awareness, but also going through some checks and balances. When IT couldn't just do things carte blanche, there was an approval process, similar to when you go through your ISMS. But ultimately, the board then had IT and cybersecurity as an agenda item, and they received information on metrics and improvements in how the plan was going. So I think the sort of proof in the pudding was, if we get invited back in 12 months' time to give them a sort of reassessment of their posture and see how far they've got on. But the sort of what's the word I'm trying to think of, the value of that assessment really highlighted that they were operating with a high level of risk, a risk that they've now started to reduce. Thanks to a sort of an assessment. So it gives you a sort of whirlwind sort of timeline of our assessment and how we got through from start to finish. Really, it was the easiest assessment I've ever done in my life, and it's probably one I'm never going to forget, because I thought someone can't be this incompetent. And there are companies out there and IT teams that are either incompetent or don't know how to do the job properly, and then someone comes in who's security minded and just turns their business upside down, sort of dumps them in the water, and then that's when they start to pay attention to the importance of good IT hygiene, and how ultimately, if you've got a competent IT team, security in essence should take care of itself. So thank you for joining me on this assessment overview. If you've liked the video, please comment, like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you very much.